Yeah, nothing ever good happens after 48 hours in Vegas. It's pretty much
No.
all you really need in that. And
Yeah.
yeah, I used to go with a group of people who wouldn't even get hotel rooms. You would just go and do 48 straight hours and get back on the plane and go back. So it's yeah, it's that kind of town.
How much time did you have to spend in Vegas when you were doing the work, like researching for the story and
Yeah. So for bringing down the house, I spent about 6 months going back and forth with the MIT blackjack team, learning how they did it, carrying money on my body, watching them in action. And then to write the book, I actually wrote it in Vegas, staying in a different hotel room every night. So it was actually, I wrote the book in about 16 days. So it was a very quick book, but I wrote it, I stayed everywhere. I stayed, the worst hotels and the best hotels, because I wanted to get the feel of what it's like to sort of be a part of the card counting team. So then when we made the movie, we shot for over a month, maybe 2 months in Vegas. So I was on set for that as well. So I spent a fair amount of time in Vegas. And over the years, I'm always there 4 or 5 times a year, I would say. Back pre-pandemic, speaking gigs and that sort of thing brings me to Vegas a lot. But back when I was writing that book, I would say I spent a lot of time in Vegas. Yeah.
So what did you contribute during the filming of the movie? And what do they like ask from you creatively?
Yeah, so the author of the book is like the lowest man on the totem pole. They don't even really want you there. You're like, they tell you to go hang out at the bar, basically. I've always said a producer's favorite author is a dead author because you give them the book and then they can go make the movie. But 21 was actually a really fun movie to be a part of because it was a whole all young cast. Everybody involved was really young. It was Kate Bosworth and Jim Sturgis, who was amazing, and Aaron Yu. Became very good friends with Josh Gad, who went on to play Olaf and is just this incredible actor. And so they were all like hanging out. We shot for a couple months in Boston, so they were all just hanging out in my apartment, and we were playing video games and going out to bars. And then we were in Vegas, and we were hitting casinos with a whole movie crew and card counters. So it was this kind of wild traveling circus where the security didn't want the card counters near the blackjack tables, but the actors they did want at the blackjack tables. So we were kind of mixing in card counting and actors, and it was just really fun. I would say in terms of what I contributed, once they've got a script and a director, the author contributes very, very little. You're basically hanging out until we ended up getting some of us kicked off the set because the actors were getting too drunk with the card counters. But it was, in the end, I had a blast. It was Robert Luketic was the director who had done Legally Blonde. So everything looks beautiful. It's one of those movies you can watch 21 just for sort of, it just feels like you're in Vegas. I think it's a very good movie. It's not Rounders. It's a very different movie. People who love cards understand what Rounders is and understand what 21 is. And there's a sea between those two movies. But 21 is that movie you watch on the plane on your way to Vegas for the first time. And I think it's kind of perfect for that.
Yeah, it is an amazing movie. I think the first time I saw it, it was probably close to 10 years ago, right? When did it come out? 2010, something like that?
I think, it was 2007, I believe.
2007,
so, yeah,
okay.
Even longer, yeah.
And so what about The Social Network?
Yeah.
How did that come about? And who did you originally meet that introduced you to that story? I believe somebody emailed you out of the blue.
Yeah. So it was basically 21 was about to have its premiere. And at 2 a.m, I got a random email from a Harvard senior. And he said, my best friend founded Facebook and no one's ever heard of him. And, I'd heard of Mark Zuckerberg and never heard of anyone else. And this was, you got to remember, 2007, around that period. So Facebook was not a big thing. It was little. It was, college kids. It was a little bigger than that, but not everyone was on Facebook.
Yeah, it was MySpace.
Yeah, MySpace was bigger. Friendster was still kicking, I think. I went out for a drink and in walked Eduardo. And Eduardo Saverin at that point had never spoken to anyone. No one had ever met Eduardo. No one had ever heard of Eduardo. His name had been taken off the masthead. And he started the conversation by saying, Mark Zuckerberg fucked me. And so at that point I was a journalist. So I said, tell me more. And he proceeded to tell me this great story about, him and Mark meeting in this underground Jewish fraternity and how they had, Mark had almost gotten kicked out of school for making that website where you could vote on who the hottest girl at Harvard was. And And then he met the Winklevoss twins, and it was just an incredible story. I mean, everyone knows the story, but it was this wild, never heard before story, you know, and I was blown away. And so I basically hung out with Eduardo for a few months. He talked to me and talked to me and talked to me. It turns out, and I found out much later, that he was attempting to use me. It was this Machiavellian idea that he could talk to me for a little while and then scare Facebook into settling with him. He was in the midst of this massive lawsuit suing Facebook, demanding, you know, to get his percentage for having co-founded it. But I didn't know this at the time. I thought this was a great book idea. So I wrote a 14-page book proposal. And I sent the book proposal to my agent, and it leaked online. It was actually Gawker, if you remember the Gawker website. Yeah, they published my entire book proposal, which I'd never seen them do before. And everything exploded at once. That day, Facebook settled with Eduardo for $5 billion. And if you look at the settlement agreement, it says you may never speak to Ben Mezrich again, because they were trying to stop this from happening. They thought that they could stop him from talking to me and there wouldn't be a book and there wouldn't be a movie. So Eduardo cut off all contact with me. He got a legal restraining order and sent it to me. He broke up with his girlfriend because he was dating my wife's best friend at the time. And then he moved to Singapore, never to be heard from again. So I've never spoken to Eduardo since then. I ended up getting him $5 billion. And he never even called to send me a little gift basket, maybe a couple $100 million. I don't know. He never reached out again, which I understand because he had to run away from me based on the settlement agreement. That same day, Aaron Sorkin saw it online and said, I want to write this as my next movie. And David Fincher saw it online and said, I want to direct this as my next movie.
David Fincher, he did Fight Club, right?
Fight Club,
Seven,
Zodiac, so many incredible movies. Fight Club really was my favorite, of his at the time, but really brilliant director. And Aaron Sorkin, of course, had done The West Wing, but had written so many incredible movies. And it's just one of the greatest writers, I think, around. And the two of them reached out to me and said, I want to make this, and which was great.
Holy shit.
I hadn't written the book though. So it was one of these things where you're like, I sold the book to these people and then locked myself in a hotel room and just started writing.
So they were reaching out to you just based off the 14-page synopsis?
Yeah, so all of my projects have been sold on 14-page treatments, all of them.
Wow.
There's a magic art to writing these things, these treatments. And in a lot of ways, they're an easier thing to sell than a full book. But anyways, they came running into Boston and I sat in a hotel room and I was handing chapters to Sorkin as I went. And when I finished the book, I wrote the book in about 12 weeks, I would say. And then he wrote the screenplay in the next 3-4 weeks, and it was brilliant. I mean, the guy is a genius, and the movie was made within a year, which was incredible. I mean, that never happens, and so it was just this kind of crazy, wild experience. It was just a lucky random email reaching out to me, and it was just one of those moments. And then the movie, was an incredible hit. Through it, I became close to the Winklevoss twins, and they were actually one of my real major sources for the movie, in that when Eduardo came to me, the first people I reached out to were the Winklevoss twins. I just found them on Facebook and I wrote a message saying, hey, I want to talk to you guys. And we became close, and they started handing me, interesting things and all the legal stuff, which we were able to then build into the social network. So that's how I got to know the Winklevoss twins. I got to know Sean Parker as well. Sean became a really big source. Sean was trying to broker an interview between me and Mark Zuckerberg. Mark was not happy I was writing this book. He was very unhappy. He knew that Eduardo was involved. He knew the Winklevoss twins were involved. He did not want that story being told. He wanted to tell his own story. And so he kept turning me down. Sean and I would hang out, and Sean would send him questions that I wrote, and then Mark would refuse to answer them. And it was kind of this back and forth for a good year. And in the end, I ended up having to write it without Mark's input. But I had Sean, I had the Winklevoss twins, I had Eduardo, and I had, I feel like it's a very true telling from all these points of view other than Mark's. Mark would tell a very different story. But I think that it's a pretty accurate story.